My name is Chris. Welcome to Space and Story. Basically, a little conversation where I like to talk about creative stuff. I'm a creative. Um, you might call it in a fancy way a multidisciplinary artist of some sort. But basically, I practice more than one form of creativity, meaning I was a chef for quite a few years, 15 years or so. Um, a musician since the age of 12. I'm now 40 something years old. A graphic designer for quite a few years. And now, currently, in my day job, I am a user experience designer. I've also done visual art more along the lines of collage. Um, so I've done, a lot of different forms of creativity, a lot of different art forms, expressions of creativity. And this is just a space where I can hopefully share that with you. Currently here in my office, studio, workshop, whatever you want to call it, here in Mexico. It's a beautiful rainy day outside. So we're just going to sit and talk a little bit about some things. So really my whole point of this is to say that creativity is all the same. No matter which way you express it, it is the same thing. And I guess to prove that point, I use my life as an example. So my really first form of expression of creativity was music. Actually, a little bit of dance probably before the music. But I would never call myself a dancer. That is not my forte. As a child, I did hip hop dancing because my brother was a dancer. And my brother was a really good hip hop dancer, like b-boy breaking, yes, but also, we think of break dancing as the form of hip hop dance. But if you grew up in the 80s and the 90s and you watched hip hop videos, like many artists had background dancers, and all of that was hip hop dancing. It wasn't break dancing, it wasn't battling, it was, its own form of expression, its own genre under hip hop dancing. I don't know if there's an official name for that. If somebody has that name, I'd love to know that name. I just count it all as hip hop dancing. So you think of Scoob and Scrap Lover for Big Daddy Kane. Flex Washington, the actor, was actually a dancer where he started. He used to dance for Nikki D back in the day. The couple examples, Big Les, who danced on the Living Single intro. Again, a hip hop dancer, but not necessarily a B-boy or B-girl. So that's kind of where I did start, but we're not going to count that. It was me and my best friend Chris and Chris. Our dance names were Hammer and Sledge. When you're, in middle school and don't have any sense, you come up with goofy stuff that just gets you inspired, so you start dancing. But that transitioned into me becoming an MC, a rapper. Because my brother did the same transition. He was dancing and then he started making music as an MC and he started making beats. So as the little brother, I wanted to do what he did. So I did. So around the age of 12, I started writing rhymes. I did that for a little while. And then when my brother started getting some equipment here and there to make beats with, we would learn together. Basically, he would teach me what he knew and I'd play with it. And that started out as sort of pause mixtapes. If you know the art form of, having a dual deck cassette tech. And you take a little piece of music from one and you record it to the other, and then you loop it. You rewind it and catch that same part over again and you're looping it. So you're going back and forth between those cassette decks and you're pausing and unpausing at the right time to hopefully I say, catch the loop. So you might be looping some drums over and over so you have something you can rap over. And sometimes it's not perfect, so it might skip or go a little off beat in some spots. But that was what we had in order to make music until we got a little bit more advanced equipment. So that's kind of where I started. I did that all through, middle school, high school, college, still do it now. It's a lifelong pursuit. It's a lifelong practice. And then my next endeavor, when I was in high school, I needed an after school job. And also my parents were divorced, so I was working at a pizza place. And my dad does not really cook well. So it was just me and my dad in the house most of the time. My brother was out running the streets doing whatever. Um, so you kind of had to figure out the food situation. So I would watch, Yan Can Cook. I would watch The Frugal Gourmet. I would watch Justin Wilson. All those sort of cooking shows on the PBS network. And that's how I kind of learned not get in the kitchen and not just be throwing stuff in the pot and just figuring it out. And at some point, I got good enough that my dad said, hey, maybe you should go to culinary school. At the time, my thought was, I'm good at science and math. I could get into the University of Maryland and go study some form of engineering. And I didn't necessarily love any of that stuff. I was just kind of good at it. So, when you're in school, a lot of times when you're good at particular things, they put you on a track. And you follow that track through and you do what society, I guess you want to call it society or the school system or whatever, tracks you into doing. So the high school I went to in Silver Spring, Maryland, was basically a track right into University of Maryland. Like you can get into University of Maryland without too many issues if you had, the right grades and the right prerequisites and all that. So getting into the University of Maryland, I was accepted. I think I was in the summer before I was supposed to go and start college. And then I hit this, epiphany that I kind of like cooking. I like eating more than I like cooking probably, but, the two kind of go hand in hand. So my dad was like, maybe think about culinary school. So I made that switch. I basically worked for another 6 months instead of going to college, and then eventually went to culinary school at the top of the next year. So that then brought in my next, form of creativity, becoming a chef, working with food as not only a thing of sustenance, but also a thing to express yourself, to tell your story. So we think, right? Like not every chef gets that opportunity. Not every chef gets to express themselves through food in the way that, Bobby Flay or Guy Fieri or Marcus Samuelson or, any of these bigger names that that you've seen on TV or that you see in these big restaurants, Daniel Boulud or whoever. You don't always get the opportunity to express yourself in that way so that people can taste your food and understand it and get the chance for you to shine in that way. We all kind of go through this, again, tracked. You start off as, maybe a dishwasher in the kitchen, and you move up to a prep cook, and then a prep cook up to a line cook. And, you make your way through the system, and eventually, you're lucky enough to get to be an executive chef. And then you make a name big enough for yourself, and you have some way to get some money together to put some people behind you. And you could open up your own restaurant and have your own food be, something that is really spoke about or highlighted in a way where you can actually show yourself and who you are through your food. But we don't all get those opportunities. And many that get those opportunities don't succeed at it, right? There's plenty of restaurants that fail. Probably one of the highest industries of failure is the restaurant industry. So when you think about all these things, music and dance and cooking, and then eventually I moved into graphic design. And the graphic design was really out of necessity, right? Because I was making music. I sort of gone through my practice. I put in enough time that I felt like I wanted to put together an album. And every album usually has to have some sort of visual to go with it. And this was, I guess, late 90s, early 2000s. This is Spotify, pre-AI, pre a lot of the things that we kind of see as an ease of getting into the music industry. So if you wanted to put a record out, you either had to get signed to a record deal or you had to put up a whole bunch of money up front to produce your own record and go sell it hand to hand. I think the only place online that I could sell through independently at that time, I'm trying to remember the name of the site. If I think about it, I'll put it on the screen later. And I think that album is probably still available on that site. But basically I had to put together an album and I needed an album cover for it. I needed, the little CD had to have a little booklet with it. And you needed, some way to get that booklet together, get that booklet together. And I didn't know anybody that could do graphic design. Even if I did, I didn't have any money to really pay them to do it. So I'm in the position of, okay, Chris, you're going to have to figure this out. And anything I've kind of learned skill wise, I feel like in my life has a lot of times been out of necessity. It's been because I had to learn this thing because I didn't have anybody else that could do it or would do it, or I couldn't afford to get someone to do it. So I put together my first album cover. Album was called Brushstrokes in Black Ink. It was like this minimalist, all white background, a couple of splashes of black, paint brushstrokes. When I go back and look at it now, it's totally horrible. It's very bad. Like mixed fonts that didn't really match together well. And it just really wasn't a good piece of graphic design, but it was mine and it was my first cover and I was able to get it out and get it done. So that kind of sparked my love and interest in graphic design. I think I was using some sort of like Microsoft Publisher or something at the time. And that kind of, eventually spiraled out into, as my sort of chef career, I think, was waning down. I was always about being a creative chef. And I love, shows like Chopped or Iron Chef, where you kind of just have this surprising basket of ingredients and what can you make from it. And like, that's always been the type of chef that I like to be. I don't necessarily go out and say, I want to cook this particular recipe. Let me get these ingredients. Like I love just walking into a grocery store or a market and just kind of seeing what's out there and grabbing some things that excite me in the moment and then trying something and putting it together. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. My wife always says, if I cook something good, cook a lot of it because I might not ever replicate that same thing again. It's very much an in the moment kind of thing. So, as my chef career was waning down, I got to the point where, I've had kids, I have children. I can't necessarily be working nights and weekends the same way I could as a younger person. And I needed a job that really was more conducive to a family schedule, which jobs in the restaurant industry typically are not conducive to that kind of schedule. So I made a decision and got into the school system to become a cafeteria manager, which, if you think about having this goal, I think early on of being in, a Michelin star kitchen or being able to open my own restaurant with my own ideas, even just cooking in a place where I felt like the food was taken seriously. I'd done a couple of those, had those experiences, not necessarily Michelin star level, but a better quality than a school cafeteria. But by the time I made that decision, I had basically kind of given up on that dream of being, the most creative chef and putting my creative food out there in that way. I could still do it at home when I felt like it, but it wasn't something I was really pursuing. The flexibility and the utility of having a job where I can get out at 3:00 in the afternoon and be home when my kids get home from school was more important than my own expression through food, because I still had music, right? I can still express myself through music. And I was still looking at graphic design and doing graphic design on my own on the side, just because I enjoyed it and I liked doing it. So in the school system, I would have entire weeks, not weeks, but the entire summer off, right? Unless I wanted to go work summer school. So, you get paid, depending on the school system, they might pay you, throughout the entire year if you set it up that way, or you might just get paid until the end of the school year. And it's like basically prorated. So you had to kind of manage your money over the summer. So over the summers, I would have, enough money to kind of survive and get through the summer and until the fall came back around. But I had the opportunity through a website called 99 Designs, which was sort of one of the earlier crowdsourcing type of websites where, companies would go up and say, hey, I need a logo. You want to put, $300 on it. Everybody kind of submit your ideas and we'll pick the idea that we like. And whoever wins gets the $300. And not knowing that this was, to those of us in the industry, this feels a lot like a scam, right? It's spec work. It's work that you do in order to hopefully get paid. It is a gamble at the end of the day. It's risky. But not knowing any better, I'm thinking, this is normal. And I would spend my summers basically just working all day. I think if I went back on the website, I may have submitted over 1,000 at least different logos to different projects. And would make just enough money over the summer to make it feel like it was worth it, right? So like I'd submit, 300 to 400 logos over the summer. I might make $1,000, $1,500, which at the time was enough to, basically supplement income over the summer. So we wouldn't be completely broke because we were, not getting that same money that you were the entire year. So, it felt good at the time. And really, it was like that was my time to put in my 10,000 hours, right? Like to put in my practice and my work. So there was some value in doing that. But at the end of the day, it wasn't the most lucrative or the best way maybe to go about it. But it was a great learning experience. Um, so I was able to kind of take that, and as I kind of hit a turning point in my life, I was, getting sicker and sicker and not really realizing it. I'm just feeling bad. I wasn't sleeping well. Um, and I hit a point where I think I was in my office in the cafeteria, and I'm sitting at my desk, doing work, and I'm literally like nodding off at my desk. I'm like falling asleep. And my cafeteria ladies would come by and like take pictures of me and be like, "We're going to hold this for blackmail in case we ever need it one day." And, I'm just not realizing that at the time my kidneys were failing. Let me get a sip of water here. So I'm getting sicker and sicker, and my kidneys are failing. I'm not necessarily in love with my job. I go and, get checked out and everything. And they say, "Hey, your kidneys are in really bad shape. You're probably going to need a transplant at some point. But for now, you need to be on dialysis. And if you're on dialysis, you actually qualify automatically for disability. You don't have to work. You can get, funds from the government for disability. Not a ton of money, but, it was enough with that and my wife working at the same time, keep us afloat. And I had sort of some time on my hands, right? So I'm sitting at home, disabled, trying to get, my body stabilized. I'm on a kidney transplant list, waiting for a kidney. And, this is a time when, you're going to examine your life, right? You're going to look and see, is there something else I want to do? Is there a change I want to make? And I like this graphic design thing. The cooking thing, not so much anymore. It's not exciting me. So I made the decision to go back to school, get a little bit more education in graphic design, and start working my career in that direction. So I'm here again. If we recap, started out with dance very briefly, then went into music, went into the culinary field, and now into graphic design. So I've kind of hit 4 different forms of creative expression. So I make my way into the graphic design field, working for a big mortgage company. I'm doing marketing materials for them, and liking it at first, and then after a while, the job, it always feels like a career can either make or break your attitude and outlook on creative expression, right? On your particular creative expression. If you're a graphic designer and you work at a great branding firm in New York and you're able to do exciting and new work, then maybe you love graphic design. But if you're working in a mortgage company where, we used to say if we wanted to sell a design to our CEO, we had to put the design on a t-shirt. Like everything was a t-shirt to him. So you're in a position where the art form that you love and you express, and like I'm always looking at what are the best examples. You're on, Dribble at the time or Behance or any of these sites where you can see all this creative inspiration and you're seeing this great work out there. And you want your work again to be in the realm of those. As a chef, you want to be in the realm of Daniel Boulud. As a designer, you want to be in the realm of, I can't even think of any names at this point. Wow. Basically, any of those big, branding agencies out of New York. What's her name? Elizabeth Walsh, is that her name? Y'all gonna kill me for the graphic designers you're watching. Like, why don't you know these names? Because I'm just old. Give me a break on that one. But, basically you go out there and you see great work and you want to be in the same realm as those people. And in your 9-to-5 job, you're not able to do it. And I'm working freelance gigs on the side from time to time. And, some of it's great and some of it's, it's work to get paid on. It's not necessarily the most amazing thing you've ever done. So I started getting into it. And I think as a graphic designer, there's times when you're making decisions visually that are based in research or data or a strategy or some conceptual idea that you're trying to get across to someone else that they don't care about, right? So a lot of times, I think at a particular level of graphic design, there is just make it look good, make it look visually appealing. And then there's also, there's a why behind what we're doing. There's a concept and a strategy as to why we're doing it. And after a while, that concept and that strategy became more important to me than maybe the visual output was. So after a while, you're doing this work to you that feels meaningful when you're trying to put effort into it in a way that the people that are accepting the work don't appreciate. They just want something that looks pretty. So that eventually led me into user experience design, which is very much about why are we designing a thing this way? Why is it important that this button be in this placement in this color and have this language on top of it? Why is it important that this workflow have 3 steps instead of 6? Why is it important to simplify? And there's something in the interface that we need to explain to them because they're not going to realize it in the moment. So the why behind your decisions becomes really important, and making design decisions based on research and data and user feedback. So like that puts me down to where I am now in user experience design, which is sort of creativity driven by research and data and user feedback. And there's still a visual aspect to it. But it's not as, visually driven as graphic design is, in that way of like, it has to be pretty and eye-catching at all times, and that's the number one thing. And not to say that's the way graphic design should be, but a lot of times, it is interpreted as, I want to make this thing pretty, let me get a designer to go pretty it up. And I'm just going to give you my ideas, and you're going to be my hands on the computer to make my idea come to life and then make it look pretty. So if we go through all that, again, dance and music and culinary and graphic design and user experience design, and there is a through line through all these things, right? So there's this sort of process of collection that happens up front. Collection, you can call it research. I've got to get my pieces together before I get started. So if I look at dancing, if you want to put together a dance routine, you have to have dance moves or dance steps, right? Like there's choreography is sort of the interpretation, connecting, networking, putting together of dance moves in a way that fits to a piece of music. Maybe it conveys a particular thought or idea, conveys a particular energy. We look at, putting together music. You get, some drums and a bass player and a guitarist and a keyboardist, and you collect all these pieces together and you say, hey, we want to do this kind of style. So I need this kind of thing from the bassist. I need this kind of thing from the drummer. And you put that together into a piece of music. I was making hip hop. So it's, let me get this drum sample from over here. Let me add my own little bass line to it. Let me grab this sample over here from, the Gap Band, and I'm going to chop it up into pieces and I'm going to rearrange it and put it together. You're like collecting all these pieces together to make this one whole. Same thing with food, right? You're going to get your onions and your bell peppers and your garlic and your chicken and tomatoes and whatever else is going to go into your dish. And you can get all these pieces and you're going to manipulate them in ways, the same way I chop a sample is the same way I chop up vegetables, right? I want to take it and rearrange it and put it together in this mixture. And then into graphic design, I'm grabbing colors and I'm grabbing shapes and text and type and all these things that make up these elements together to put them into, my cooked dish of a poster or my cooked dish of a, trifold brochure or whatever you may need in that case. And the same with user experience design. I need some data from our users and understand what they need and their problems and how they're going to use this thing I'm trying to build. And then I grab some UI elements, some buttons and colors and some boxes on a page. And like, how do I put all this together into a workflow that lets this user actually accomplish something at the end of the day? So like at its base form, like all these expressions of creativity are very similar. If you're a painter, I'm going to go and get my paints, my brushes, my canvas, maybe use some particular styles. I can mix it in with some thinner. I can use some lacquer or some varnish. Like all these things, you're just going to get your tools in order to build, right? So regardless of the artistic expression, there's a set of tools that you need to have and use and go and get, and you use those tools to build something from it. So if you think about it in that way, you can say, if I want to go from being a chef to being, a user experience designer, how can I relate those two things? How can I use my, skill set in a new way? There's a term in cooking called mise en place, which is everything in its place, which means before I start cooking, I need to have all my ingredients, all of my tools, everything in place. As a user experience designer, I put together a design brief. And the design brief says, here's what I need to accomplish. Here's my problems. Here's my use cases. Here are the people I need to talk to. Here are my users, what feedback they're giving me. And this is going to be my blueprint. This is basically my recipe, right, for what I need to create. So there's all these links between these things. And really all it takes is the time and the training and the practice, the 10,000 hours. And it doesn't have to be 10,000. Like, that's towards mastery. Like, the more you get into these particular fields, you understand that, like, there aren't a lot of masters out there, right? There's people who've done it enough to be good enough to get a great output. But mastery is a very different thing. Mastery is this idea that I can pull it apart, I can manipulate it, I can twist it, I can pull it. And if something goes down the wrong alley, I know how to pull it back out and get it back to where it belongs. So, saying all this to say, as I've lived a life and, I hopefully have more years ahead of me, and maybe there's another transition coming in the future for what else I might want to do. There is an implicit connection between all these types of creative expression. And if you're somebody who maybe you went down a particular field of creativity, of expression, whether it's, you spent years as a chef like I did and became a little disillusioned, or maybe you've been a dancer for a long time and you get hurt and you don't know what to do and you feel like there's no outlet for your creativity. I would just urge you to maybe jump into some other form of creativity, some other form of artistic expression, because your skills are transferable. You can take what you know, how you build, how you create from one form of artistic expression to another. And all it takes is some time and some energy and some resources to make that transition. I've done that transition several times and probably will continue to do that transition. So I guess if anything, it's a word today of inspiration, of go out and experiment and try some different things. Understand that your creativity is transferable. You are not just one type of artist. They say multidisciplinarian is really one discipline of understanding how to create a creative output. And if you can understand that, you can transfer that skill set to many types of artistic expression. It just takes some time to understand the tools and the rules and the way that you put those things together to create an output. So I guess that's my soapbox for today. Hopefully you guys will come back next time. Hopefully you enjoy this conversation. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments, for those who, travel across different types of creative expression. How did you find those transitions? Where were your places where you were getting tripped up between those changes? And, how valuable is your creative skill set to you? And how do you bring that thing from place to place and from story to story with you? So, as always, I'm Chris. This is Space and Story. And we'll see you guys next time. Peace, y'all.